Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to take a little bit of time to talk to you guys about 4, 5, 6, something along those lines. A few different builds that you might very well see emerging with the changes to Darkglare, with the changes to the undocumented pet haunt, Shadows Embrace, Eradication from the shadow scaling, and just general changes that have happened over the course of 9.1 PTR. Now, a couple of these builds we talked about a little bit before in 9.0.5 PTR, but with the undocumented changes, I guess change, whatever you want to call it, being brought back in this PTR version, and with an improved version affecting Darkglare as well as your Infernal, things might actually be a little more relevant. So I want to take a little bit of time and look at them today. Also, having Darkglare baseline might change a couple things. Now, if you guys are interested in acquiring any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here, you can get them all for free off my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime, feel free to do so. I will also be streaming all the raid testing this week, which it's January, geez, it's May 5th right now. Raid testing is on the 6th and the 7th. If you can't make it my stream, I'll have the videos posted here on YouTube probably within a couple hours as well. Also, a huge shout out, thank you so much to all my patrons for the support, really appreciate it, guys. Heads up, the 9.1 Warlock spreadsheet will indeed, I guess, be created this weekend, give or take Saturday or Sunday, after this week's raid testing has concluded. The tier 3 Felguard rank of my Patreon or higher does indeed get early access to that. If you would like to do so, feel free to take a look. With that being said, let's get into some of these builds, starting off with one of my personal favorites, 1 minute Darkglare. So the 1 minute Darkglare build is one we played probably in the first few weeks of 9.0 as one of the meme builds, I guess you can say, as far as Mythic Plus was concerned. The general idea and premise behind it is that you can extend basically every single Soul Rot and Phantom Singularity or Vile Taint if you're playing it with every single Darkglare being a minute. Now, there are some extra synergies now, one being Withering Bolt because, hey, a longer dot extension on your PS and on your Soul Rot, if you're playing PS, whatever what have you, means that your Shadow Bolts are going to deal more damage, means your Drain Souls are going to deal more damage, and that depends if you're playing Nightfall or Drain Soul. We're probably playing Shadows Embrace here because, well, you know, it's Mythic Plus. Outside of that, So the Seeds has been buffed, so there's a bit of an anti-synergy there, I guess, technically you can say. But regardless, the fact of the matter is that Darkglare is now baseline. So instead of having to play Darkglare and Wilfred's and Corrupting Lair and sort of hinder yourself power level wise by not having the option of playing Haunt or playing something else along those power, like higher power lines, you only have to play Wilfred's and Corrupting Lair. Now, you're missing out on Agony Shard Gen and or Demonic Synergy or whatever what have you, but the power level, I'm curious to see where this goes. So if we end up removing the actual so the Seeds play here, let's just say we still play Wrath and Agony, and let's say for simplicity's sake we stick with the regular Vile Taint play, and we open up just how we normally used to by casting our Seed, going into our Agonies here. We're playing Wilfred's, we're playing Corrupting Lair, we're playing everything that we normally play. Up our Ruby, Vile Taint, Soul Rot, there you go, and we just start Rapturing. You'll notice, look at our Darkglare here, just getting chunked down. Also, we should attack Shadows Embrace first here. Look at our Darkglare getting chunked down here. One, that's from Corrupting Lair procs, and number two, that's from, well, honestly, just the amount of Raptures you're casting, because this is a 4-target scenario. Now, I did test this in 3 targets, and like 2-target, 3-target settings, and also single target, and unfortunately, it didn't really cut it in single target, but nonetheless, it still seems like a potentially viable, even though I hate using that word, option when it comes to 9.1. And once again, there also is a synergy behind Withering Bolt. Looking at our damage breakdown here, Drain Soul's doing about 3%, I-Beam's doing about 5%, but when you have your Darkglare every single minute, you can see it's literally lined up here perfectly with our Soul Rod. You're going to have a more consistent, I guess you can say, priority damage window than you did before because you have access to Shadows Embrace versus having to take Darkglare here. It was a fun build. It was sort of a meme-y kind of build. And at the same time, I sort of feel like So the Seeds is probably going to be a little more relevant this time around if speculation and everything remains the same as far as Mythic Plus is concerned, because, well, So the Seeds is pretty powerful in its current form, but technically you could even play this build with So. If you open up a very similar way, you still are rolling your Agonies, you're still rolling your UA for your Corrupting Lair procs, and you just spam So the Seeds. Wilfred's works off of a shard being consumed. It doesn't require you to cast Rapture. So your Darkglare, we can pop it here just for example, it'll still lose, you can see it getting chunked here. There's a chunk, there's a chunk, there's a chunk. You'll still have that 1 minute-ish Darkglare. I think our best pull's been about 50% or so, give or take, on these mobs here, with each or 50%, 50 seconds on our Darkglare. It actually beat our Soul Rot coming off cooldown, which is pretty surprising because you pop your Soul Rot before your Darkglare in the first place. This build has a bit of extra power added to it with baseline Dark Caller, with Haunt, Shadow's Embrace now increasing Darkglare eye beam damage, and also the sort of like, I guess you can say hidden potential in Withering Bolt. It gives you a pretty solid AoE profile every minute, because your Darkglare extends dots, and you have your Withering Bolt profile on single target. You have Shadow's Embrace if you want it on a mob here, or Haunt, and you also have your Darkglare's damage being increased by Shadow's Embrace at 3 stacks, or Haunt if you choose to play it. 1 minute Darkglare, it's fun in AoE, fun in Mythic Plus, but as far as single target's concerned, we couldn't get it down that low. We were looking at about a minute and a half Darkglare in our best pulls, and you're not holding your PS and Soul Rot for extra 30 seconds. But when it came to AoE and Mythic Plus, the build was actually pretty fun, and I feel relatively competitive. So the second build here is also affliction based, and it's more speculative. These talents are not an accident here. I have probably never played these talents in this combination in my life. They sound and feel miserable, but the more you think about it, this build's actually very synergistic. Number one, we are playing Shadow's Embrace over Haunt. Keep in mind, Shadow's Embrace's duration, however you want to word that, has been extended to 16 seconds from 12 in PTR. So it's longer duration, easier to maintain. We're playing it over Haunt because Haunt has roughly the same cast time as a Shadow Bolt. So it means if you're having to cast your Haunt 3 to 4 times a minute to maintain the buff, you're losing out on roughly 3 Shadow Bolt cast every single minute. Shadow's Embrace might be 1% less, 9 versus 10% bonus damage when it's stacked fully, and no impact damage, but you just stack it passively with your Shadow Bolt, so arguably it makes it a little better. This build is it's centered around Withering Bolt, because Withering Bolt increases your Shadow Bolt damage by 36% when it's empowered at eye level 226 for each dot effect you have active. So we're playing Agony, we're playing Corruption, we're playing Siphon Life, we've got UA, we're playing Vile Taint over Phantom Singularity, because PS is a 13-second dot essentially every minute if you're holding it for your Soul Rot. Vile Taint is a 10-second dot essentially every 20 seconds. So you're looking at about half a minute of uptime every minute versus, 13-ish seconds, which should theoretically empower your Shadow Bolt or your Drain Souls by a pretty substantial amount. Now, as far as the opener goes here, this build is a bit of a mess. I'm still trying to figure it all out. I've been precasting 2 Shadow Bolts into my precast UA. It'll hit that when the boss pulls. Agony, Corruption, Siphon, pop my Ruby now. We can go like Vile Taint here, Dark Soul, Soul Rot, Darkglare. We just Rapture. Now we are playing Malefic Wrath here, which is a bit awkward. I want to stack my Shadow's Embrace here, but I also want to try and maintain this buff here while also squeezing in these Vile Taint procs. Now, depending on your Vile Taint cast, so depending on your actual opener and things, you might just very well be able to go right into your actual cast of like multiple Raptures if you get a bunch of shards generated. I'm not lucky here, I didn't get it, but I think consistency wise, this build's probably going to be, well, I mean, the most consistent damage wise over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, or it very well could be, because you're maintaining multiple dots for a pretty good bit of time. The big thing here is you have to be pretty tight with your cast windows or your refresh windows on your Malefic Wrath. Here's my timer right here. I can go Vile Taint now. We're going to get this shard, but it's going to be close. So we go there, bam, and we keep blasting this. 15k Shadow Bolt, say, I feel pretty good. At times, you are quite possibly going to have to hold your Vile Taint. We're actually going to let this drop here because we don't get any shard gen. At times, you're going to have to hold your Vile Taint. You're just not going to get the charge in for it, and that's how it is. I almost feel like on my opener I don't even have one to Rapture at certain points in time just because of the lack of charge gen that I get in it. But look at our Shadow Bolt damage. It's 30%. This is a decent bit higher than it was in testing yesterday. It was about 25-ish, give or take. The Shadow Bolt damage is very real. This build is very, very, very GCD intensive, but if you get good shards into your opener, or able to actually like just conserve shards and get good RNG and just get good refunds, whatever, what have you, maintaining that Vile Taint buff, but also having that Malefic Wrath buff up a pretty good portion of the time, it's going to lead to a pretty high amount of Shadow Bolt damage. Now, this is going to take a lot more testing, probably a lot more playing through to figure out how good it actually is and if it's maintainable, but it does seem pretty solid, albeit pretty GCD intensive. Pretty solid, and probably the best build we have to work around Withering Bolt. If it doesn't work out, well then hey, at the same time, just play Phantom Singularity and you don't have any shard issues whatsoever. Shifting gears here, the third build is actually Destro based. This build's actually pretty cool. I have not tested with it a whole lot. I want to do so more over the next few weeks. We've played this more generic build with flashover instead of eradication here, but similar to how Haunt and Shadow's Embrace are working for affliction with pet damage, spoilers ahead, FTS is working with demonology for tyrant damage, eradication is now working for destruction with your imp damage with your infernal damage. In the previous PTR, the 9.0.5 cycle, when that weird undocumented change was around, Haunt, Shadow's Embrace, all the modifiers, they did not increase Darkglare damage, they did not increase infernal damage. Infernal damage being its melee damage, immolation aura, or the infernal awakening effect it has when it actually lands. This time around, they've all been fixed. We've already covered affliction with I-beam damage. This build of Destro is actually really interesting, and I'm actually pretty excited to test with it, maybe even tomorrow in a little bit of raid testing here. Where the main change here, we're looking at a single target build, although this could work in 2 target, 3 target, whatever have you. It probably actually is actually pretty good in 2, 3 plus targets because of Reign of Chaos being a thing. We're playing Eradication or Flashover. Playing Wilfred's, Reign of Chaos, Dark Soul, and Ruby. Big 2-minute build. We played this a lot in Mythic Plus lately, a little bit in raiding. Thing here, Infernal Brand, the Conduit. Remember how OP it was in beta and they nerfed it 10,000 times? Well, every individual Infernal has its own stack of Infernal Brand Immolation Aura stacking if you proc one and they land. They also melee individually. Eradication increases the damage of your main Infernal's Immolation Aura, its melee damage, as well as every single other Infernal that you proc and its Infernal Brand damage through Eradication. So there's a pretty big damage amp, a pretty big damage window, roughly every 2 minutes or so, give or take, which we're playing Wilfred's. So, well, you got around 2-minute Infernal. So the opener that I've been following for the most part, playing Eradication here, I will say going from playing Flashover with Cinders to Eradication, things do feel a little bit different, a little slower, but at the same time, you know, well, I think this build's gonna be worth it. I don't even have any food anymore. It's fine, is what it is. The opener we've been following, or I've been following for the most part, is just similar. Precast Kata right into my Ruby, drop the Infernal, Soul Rot, and then we pop Dark Soul and we go. We're praying for an early Infernal proc. Praying. One of the big things is that first of all, Blizzard needs to fix Reign of Chaos and make your first shark consuming spell proc an Infernal. I've cast 3 Chaos Bolts now and still haven't proc an Infernal. But the cool thing is, if you proc an Infernal off your first shark consuming spell, you actually get an insane extra, I guess, amount of shard gen. This is a great ability, Blizzard. Thank you. I love having a completely dead talent. Dear God, please listen to my feedback spreadsheet and change this thing. It's so awesome playing with a level 45 talent and having 0 procs. Or 1 in the last 2 seconds of a half-minute window. Let's try it again. Okay, let's try this again. I actually had to re-record this 2 times. This is my 4th attempt doing this. Blizzard, please just fix Reign of Chaos. Make the first shard-consuming spell proc an Infernal. It's a night and day difference between procking an Infernal on like your first Chaos Bolt, even your second one compared to your 9th. Having a talent that lasts half a minute in Reign of Chaos and not having it proc a single Infernal into the last 2 seconds when your Dark Soul and everything else is already fallen feels really bad, and it's just really poor design. I feel like, can we just please have the first spell proc an Infernal? That's all I want. Anyways, with that being said, let's do it. I even hit the drums. Why not? We're going to our Kata, into our Ruby, drop the Infernal, Soul Rot, pray for a proc. Dark Soul, let's go. Eradication should be up about now. Oh my gosh, dude, we proc an Infernal. This is actually exciting stuff, boys. Holy cow, this is like a server first, a world first right here. The big thing here, though, hoping to chain this charge into more Infernals. As you can see here, this is why procking an Infernal off the bat is so incredibly important. Maintaining Eradication here. When we get through this window, you'll see a good portion of your damage is Immolation Aura, is the actual melee damage from your Infernals. And you can also see Infernal Brand, individual buffs from individual Infernal stacking higher and higher. Now, unlike playing Madness of Azek here to Legendary, you sort of want to spread your Chaos Bolts out a little bit here. In that window, I might not have done the best. I was sort of just paying attention to other debuffs, whatever, what have you. But you want to try and maintain a higher Eradication uptime than... You want to try and maintain a higher Eradication uptime, like we did here. Essentially, when it's starting to fall about the 2-second mark, you want your next bolt to be cast and be hitting about the time that it falls. But looking at the actual breakdown here, 17% of our damage is Immolation Aura. 6% is melee damage, Infernal Awakening being a little bit here. But if you compare this to a damage, like a pull without your Infernals, without Eradication, the Immolation Aura damage and the melee from your Infernal is actually a decent bit lower. That 10% damage amp is strong. Immolation Aura is impactful, especially when you pair it with Infernal Brand. Now, I haven't been the biggest fan of Infernal Brand, the Conduit, in a long time, after it got nerfed multiple times over the course of beta, but with this change, it could be a serious contender in single target. And as far as Destro's conduits are concerned, you pretty much play Ashen Remains, I feel like basically everywhere, and then Duplicitous Havoc in 2 target. And most of the time you just been going Nia's Burrs in like single target fights because Infernal Brand's pretty mediocre in single target, and Combusting Engine's a literal nightmare, a horrible conduit to play with, and just a weird playstyle. So having some extra value added to Infernal Brand and maybe even Eradication this time, I wouldn't mind it. It's been a long time since we had Eradication around, going back to, I guess, when I loathed it with Eradication IC, but before then it was like Antorus. I'm down for a bit of Eradication gameplay. Yeah, Flashover and Cinders feel pretty good together because 3 conflict rate charges, extra conflict rate damage, or 3 backdraft charges, extra conflict rate damage, whatever, what have you. But at the same time, if it's just better, it's just better. I think this build has a lot of hidden potential. I'm excited to see where this build goes, both in single target and 2 target and 3 target. Pair this maybe with Madness Magic here, even without Wilfred's. Eradication might crank. So when it comes to Demonology, unlike Destro and AF, Demo has a bit more intricacies with the, I guess, speculative builds that I want to talk about today. Shadow's Embrace, Haunt, Eradication, they all just increase your damage by X amount, a flat X%, and it affects everything basically the same. From the Shadows, it's a little different though. It increases your Shadow Flame damage to the target or whatever's hit by your Dreadbite from your Dreadstalkers by 20% for the next 12 seconds. Now, Shadow Flame damage is Demon Bolt, Hand of Gul'dan splash damage, and Implosion from the actual Warlock himself. Interestingly enough though, I'll pop my Tyrant here. We'll watch FTS go on the mob here for a second. There we go. There's the FTS application. Here comes Tyrant. Now watch how hard my Tyrant hits. 3730, 3700 roughly, give or take. When this FTS buff drops about here, he's hitting for less. 3100, 3100 basically. FTS affects your Tyrant's Demon Fire damage. Now, there's been a handful of builds that have emerged and were talked about, speculated upon, whatever, what have you, a lot over the course of, I guess, 9.0.5 PTR and stuff. Because, well, I mean, Dreadlash and FTS offers the most consistency when it comes to Mythic plus trash, whatever, what have you. Demonic Strength being a 1-minute cooldown, it pairs very well with Wilfred's and your Tyrant every minute. Bombers is a half-minute cooldown, costs 2 soul shards. Dreadlash is just tied to your Dreadstalkers, so you have that AoE Dreadbite every 20 seconds. If you're playing Demonic Calling, a pretty good portion of the time I'd say your dogs are going to cost no shards. Even if they do, it's a pretty good bit of damage every, third of a minute, and it's not half a minute or an actual minute itself. When you pair Dreadlash with FTS, it AoEs the FTS application onto every target that's hit by your Dreadbite. Dreadbite, Dreadlash, FTS. They all work very well together. What increases implosion damage from the Shadows? It AoEs in every mob. So this gives you a very, very consistent and strong AoE damage profile. You have basically the same cooldowns every single pack. If you're rolling a Tyrant from the previous pack with a lot of imps out, and you have like a Calling proc, or just go into another pack, you can cast Dreadstalkers and launch a massive implosion with FTS up through Dreadlash, which gives an insane amount of damage. There's even more synergy if you're playing the Carnivorous Stalkers conduit, because number one, your Dreadstalkers can just rebite, they can rechop again and reapply the Dreadbite AoE effect on every mob. If you're playing Dreadlash, it's very powerful because it's going to reproc, re-AoE at every single mob there actually is. When you have your Tyrant out as well, keep in mind your Tyrant is affected by FTS, so your Tyrant will extend as long as you do it properly the called Dreadstalker set you put into it, and you're also going to be able to cast a second set of Dreadstalkers where your Tyrant is still active with the previous set still up. So it's going to give you a pretty high, I mean, it's going to guarantee you have FTS up for at least the second half of your Tyrant, and if they reproc off of Carnivorous Stalkers, it gives you that full damage amp for basically all of your Tyrant. Now, the main issue with this build, I feel, and this talent here sort of alternates a bit. I've seen Grimoire builds, I've seen Soul Conduit builds, I've even seen a few Inner Demons builds. The main issue with this build, I felt personally, is that it's sort of lacking in single target. It really doesn't have, or I guess didn't have, that single target damage profile. It sort of felt like AF when you went in playing Absolute Corruption and just not Siphon Life. You did good trash damage, it was fine, it was consistent, but when it came to bosses or prideful mobs or single target priority packs, whatever, what have you, you weren't really pulling your weight. In classes that could do similar AoE or maybe even better, Fire Mage, Hunter, whatever, what have you, also did better single target damage. But having from the Shadows now affect your Tyrant's Demon Fire damage is going to be a massive change to this build. Opener wise, there's a million different ways you can do this, but opener wise, if I was playing the Grimoire Felgar build, which I feel offers a little more single target damage comparatively to Soul Conduit, if you're playing SC, it means more imps, larger implosions, whatever, what have you. Grimoire is a 2-minute CD, but if I am indeed playing Wilfrids with this build, it gives you a Grimoire and a larger Tyrant, essentially, well, I mean, essentially every other Tyrant. Bang, Felguard into dogs, Soul Rot, build a few shards here. Pop your Ruby about now, give or take, and we're going to cast a couple of hands. Unfortunately, we got that proc a little late. We could have used it. We go right into our Tyrant here. Catch our dogs, and there we go. Now, you hope for an FTS reproc here of Carnivorous. I don't think we're going to get it, but either way, we have dogs here in about 2 seconds. So you launch them now. There you go. And we actually got a reproc right when we launched them. But this will cover this like the last half of your Tyrant, the last 40% give or take. So that's buffed. But that's a pretty substantial single target DPS increase. And hey, on a pack, if it's dying and you're moving on to the next pack, you got a massive implosion here too. You can launch a crazy amount of imps, catch your dogs beforehand for an FTS buff on them all, and just do a really, really insane amount of damage. And the fact of the matter is, you have this essentially every minute and 10 seconds if you're playing Wilfrids. It's a pretty strong increase when it comes to single target damage, and also just the consistency that this build brings in Mythic Plus. I'll admit, I haven't played it a lot, really at all lately, but the consistency is there. And now that you have this 20% damage after your Tyrant, which makes up a pretty good portion of your damage, this build could be very real. It already is real. I'm legitimately thinking this build might end up being the best, or at least this combination of talents here, with a little bit of variety in this row, could very well be the best build we have for Demonology in Mythic Plus on most weeks. There's also a bit of a debate between playing Wilfrids versus Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling, which increases your Dreadstalker damage by more, which means, hey, larger Dread Bites, larger this, that, whatever, what have you. But either way, depending, whatever legendary you play, the FTS buff affecting your Tyrant's Demon Fire damage makes a world of a difference for this build. You have the single target damage now. You have the priority damage. You have the ability to Tyrant that Prideful mob and have it for the last half of that buff on the next pack you pull. You have the ability to Tyrant multiple bosses, or Tyrant multiple times during a boss, and then have it for the next pack. Those insane implosions you build from one pack moving to the next, casting your dogs, applying FTS, huge implosion. It's there. There's a lot of intricacies with this build, but it's actually really, really fun. I've enjoyed both versions. Felguard, Soul Conduit, whatever you go with in this row, this synergy here with Carnivorous Stalkers and Demonic Assumption is just too strong to ignore. The build is really good. This is the build I was most excited about last time on PTR when the change came out, then it was removed. I pray this undocumented change stays around because this build looks really strong and honestly a lot of fun in Mythic Plus. Now, I have to admit, out of all of these builds we've talked about today, I'm pretty excited for the Infernal Destro Random Chaos build. I've had a lot of fun playing that in Plus, even in rating, but I'm really, really excited to play Demonology more in Plus and see where it stacks up single target wise, AoE wise, and just how that build feels in general. AF's been like the go-to spec, I feel like, in Plus for a while, the higher you go, but the synergies in that build are very real. And unlike most classes, having a 1-minute cooldown, that's as large as your Tyrant, and having that consistent damage and AoE Dreadbite implosion outside of that is really strong and not something you see in Mythic Plus a whole lot. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. And hey, AF's cool too, I suppose, but come on, we've been playing AF for a while. But if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the comment section below or swing by stream anytime and ask. I'll be sure to get back to you. Let me know what you guys' I guess what y'all guys' favorite build is in the comment section below as well. I have a feeling I know what it is, but either way, drop it down there as well. I'm curious. Any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here, you can grab free off my Twitch. Also, if you want to swing by, feel free to do so. Heads up, once again, the 9.1 Warlock spreadsheet will indeed be going up, I would assume, this weekend after raid testing on my Patreon. The tier 3 Felguard rank or higher gets early access to that. If you're interested, also feel free to take a look. If you guys want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, be sure also to smash those like and subscribe buttons below. It helps out a ton. Thanks so much, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.